I'm Nancy Ankrum, editorial page editor of the Miami Herald. Here in Greater Miami, we've had a string of horrific events, the latest being the partial collapse of the Champlain South Towers condominium in Surfside. Last month, the community was rattled by a series of shootings, one at a gathering straddling Wynwood and Overtown, another outside a banquet hall where people were attending a banquet, and another after a graduation party in Kendall. The editorial board is determined not to let chronic violence in this community become business as usual, something that, if not experienced personally, becomes background noise. When the bullets stop flying, there are flesh and blood human beings left to work through the pain, the grief, and the trauma. Today, you'll hear from two women who, day by day, are working through that pain, and a man who is working to keep young people from becoming those who inflict it. You are also going to hear right now from an artist whom the awfulness of violence has inspired to keep alive the humanity of those who have lost their lives to gun violence.
All right, whenever you're ready.
George Floyd, Demaine Martin, Jamar Rollins, Willie James McDonald, Antonio Butler, Jermaine McBean, Barry Geddes, Travis McNeil, DeCarlo Moore, Nico Crooks, Lynn Weatherspoon. I started to incorporate social justice in my work probably in college. I was given the freedom to address social issues in my work while learning, principles. And I started to really put in text and feeling and specific imagery to send a message. Kevin Richardson, Deontay Sellers, James Leatherwood, Alan Blanchard.
That was Miami artist Shia Reagans, reading the names of those shot dead by police, by peers, by strangers. We thank co-directors Matos and Dennis Scholl for allowing us to use the clip. Separately, Reagan's exhibit, a reflection of the times, and at the Bakehouse Art Complex in Miami through November 1st. I'd like to introduce our guests now. Megan Hobson, coordinator of the Miami chapter of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. Herman Dubois is the founder of Hope Murals, and Serena Saul, who lost her son to gun violence in 2016. Welcome all. Thank you for spending the time with us and so generously sharing your stories. Serena, your son's name is among those in Shia Reagan's exhibit. Isaiah was killed as he attended the wake of a friend who was also a victim of gun violence. Since then, where has this tragic experience led you?
Good morning. Actually, it was one of his family members. It was a cousin who was killed by gun violence. And I sent Isaiah down there to attend the wake to pay his respects. And unfortunately, he was caught in a crossfire. Where it has left me at this point, heartbroken. I'm still grieving. I feel like I haven't yet mourned the loss of my son, because as a Black woman, we know that we have this cape that we must wear. So I haven't had time to really grieve, to process, to mourn. His death has left me with PTSD, manic depression. I have night terrors. It's a lot. It's a day-to-day, minute by minute, second by second life journey. This is my new norm, whatever that is, and it's just trying to process it 1 second at a time.
I understand. When Isaiah was killed, you were thrust in front of the media at the worst point in your life.
Mhm.
What should journalists, whose job it is to get information, to elicit quotes, what should they know? What should we know about how to treat and not treat people in shock and grief after such a devastating loss like this?
I know what I've experienced from my experience is that with journalists, most times it's just to put a story out there. And sometimes I believe there's a disconnect with the humanity of a person. I think we lose sight that what's going on is tragic. I think we all know that we all have a job to do. This is what you all signed up for. But I think a lack of compassion is present at that moment. That's what I've experienced because, of course, you all have to tell a story, but sometimes the story gets blurry. It's not the truth, and it's selling a story, but not treating the grieving parents, the grieving families as people. We like to speculate and believe that because, like with Isaiah, I've come across some horrible stories in reference to him where I even emailed the journalist and said, look, do not dehumanize and demonize my son. You understand? Like, don't make him seem as if he was less than or that he deserved to be shot down like an animal because he didn't. So as his mother, I have to be his voice in his demise. You understand? And it's unfair that every platform that I get on, I have to say Isaiah was an innocent bystander. Isaiah was an innocent bystander. Isaiah was an innocent bystander because what? He was killed in the inner city. He was Black, and he was a 15-year-old male. And unfortunately, Black males at a certain age don't receive the same compassion as our counterparts.
Understood. When you reached out to those journalists to tell them, do not demonize or dehumanize my son, what was the response?
I got none. I received none. And that's okay. Because I think, people figured, again, he was killed in an inner city. So maybe he comes from a certain background. But then when I started getting on platforms and speaking, it was like, oh my God, she speaks well. Oh my God, she's educated. And even if I wasn't, even if I didn't use proper grammar or speak proper English, whatever that is, it is still not a reason to make any child or anyone for that matter less than who they really were or who they are, because regardless of what, he meant something to a whole lot of people, so.
Understood. Have the shooters been captured or the suspects been captured at all?
Excuse my facial expression. No. No.
They have not.
No leads, no. And it felt like at one point that I was playing detective. Like you would have thought I went to school for criminal justice. Like I was an FBI agent. Everything that I heard, when I did hear things, I would report it back to the police. To be honest, I haven't heard from his detective in years. I would not lie to you. Like if I did speak to her, it is because I reached out. But after a while, you start feeling as if they're being dismissive, that they already deemed it as a cold case. So it has left me to try to actually just move on, not from his death, but not get so consumed in trying to find out who killed him. So I just speak on every platform, and I'm honored to speak on any platform to acknowledge who Isaiah was and who he still is to me.
And we appreciate your sharing it on the platform with us too, Maybe you were shot in a drive-by. You were in a car. minding your own business, caught in the crossfire and shot by someone firing an AK-47. Your hips, small intestine, bladder, your nerves were shattered. You are alive, but you too are living a new normal. For instance, this July 4th, you likely will be wearing headphones because fireworks are a trigger. Can you talk about what your healing process has looked like, both physically and mentally?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So for me, the journey has been, I would say it has been different. I think in the beginning, right in the aftermath of the shooting, it was a lot of physical recovery that I had to do. So I went through therapy, and the struggles that I faced was more so with just pain management. Um, but I think the biggest issue that I've had and I've had to like work with and work through daily is the mental side of things. I think PTSD, anxiety, I have anxiety and an overwhelming amount of anxiety sometimes. And that's just based on the fact that I feel like there's a lot of resources that I was not offered in the aftermath of the shooting, though a lot of people think that survivors get resources. A lot of times we don't know about them, we don't know where to go to get them. And so for me, my healing journey was deeply rooted in trying to create spaces for myself and survivors like myself to at least be able to tell our stories in a way where it felt authentic to us. I think it's very easy for gun violence to seem like just the hot topic to talk about, but it does not feel like that at all to me. It's uncomfortable a lot of times, but it's my life. And when I do my work, it's kind of led me into advocacy. Honestly, I felt like there's a lot of people who have had an opportunity to speak on behalf of victims or survivors of gun violence, and not oftentimes do they speak with the survivors. So, just like Serena, I made it my effort to show up in spaces where we were having a conversation about gun violence, about how we heal from gun violence, about what the aftermath is really like when you're surviving gun violence. And my journey has been nothing short of um, I think just navigating ebbs and flows and different systems to try to get support and resources. But I have found great comfort in building community with other survivors of gun violence and families affected by gun violence. And through those communities, we're able to heal together and to really um, rewrite what it is to be a survivor of gun violence and what that really looks like. Because I think a lot of people don't know what it really looks like to survive gun violence. So when you look like me, they think you're fine because you look fine.
Right. We lost your audio there for a little bit. And did you eventually find the kind of support that you needed to heal mentally?
So as for the support that I needed to heal mentally, I did find the support, but I did not feel comfortable always going to a mental health therapist. I think I was sent to two shortly after the shooting, and I felt like they weren't really trauma informed. I felt like they might have been informed on um, just grief, and they might have knew about the background of counseling, but they did not really understand what I was experiencing as a survivor of gun violence. And so it didn't always feel like the best place to be. I did go through several therapists, and I always say that my fourth therapist was the best one because it was myself. And I was able to really heal myself in the ways in which I knew I needed to be. Because I was able to really go within and do a lot of the studying and just the rest and finding just ritual in my day to day life that felt like support and it felt like healing to me. And I then, with communities that I build and with Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, we'd have healing vigils and healing circles where we would bring up these different coping mechanisms and offer each other just space to grieve or to feel and be. And I think in those spaces, I do feel seen, I feel heard, but oftentimes you can also be, I would say it's exhausting because you're in these spaces, and it's just really heavy to be in spaces where when you're affected by gun violence. And so, though I found these spaces, I feel like oftentimes it gets you'd have to like you'd have to really know and be in these spaces often to understand what I'm saying. But trust me, I think that when it comes to just different groups who are working to eradicate gun violence or just make efforts in providing resources, sometimes you go to these places and it doesn't feel good. And so when you do find these places, there comes a time, I feel, where you don't stay there long, and then eventually you end up pulling back. And so my journey has been like that as well. There's been moments where I was not going to these groups or events or marches or meetings, press conferences, because I was very much in a space where healing to me looked like protecting my peace and staying private into myself, because I did not want to just be a story to someone. And I knew that oftentimes when people just wanted a story, there's so many more things I wanted. And I think that finding the spaces and creating them, you have to do both of them when you're a survivor like myself.
Did you find too, like Serena, that you had to deal with media at all?
Yeah, so with me, the media, I think my media situations were different because oftentimes they want, I feel like I got that the media wanted the stories of victims, the ones who had passed away, and they wanted directly to speak with their family. And when I come to these spaces, they kind of just wanted to share my story so they did not seem like they overlooked survivors of gun violence. And it's not enough to just talk to me and say that I did what I had to do, because there was that kind of representation. There are so many survivors just like myself, and I feel like oftentimes I end up talking with these survivors in the community who say, oh, no one ever asked me my story. And so I find that with the media, there's been times when they might see me supporting a family, or they know that I have close relationships with the family due to my work, and they would try to use that to get closer to that family. And I've had to have conversations with many journalists about what it is that you do when you really tell a story. I think the story is not a journalist's story to tell, really. It's the family or the affected individual's story to tell. It's a journalist's job to elevate that story. And I think that most times I've had a lot of experiences where I feel like if it did not fit exactly the message that they were going for, I would do interviews, I would speak in different spaces, and what I said would be cut out because it did not align with whatever the messaging was they were trying to paint as an image. As I said, a lot of times healing. So I've had different encounters with the press. But even as I work with families, I've often spoke to them about the need for speaking to the families first about who it is that they lost as a loved one, versus just wanting to get the facts and the statistics of numbering. This is the X amount of number shooting in this space this year. We only know sometimes on the news how a person passed away, but when you have an opportunity to speak to the family or the individual about what your life was like before, I think it's important we do those things, which is why I was happy to come and speak with you all today.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Herman, you have introduced art, specifically mural making, into the lives of young people in juvenile detention. I'd like for all of us to take a look at a few of the murals that the young people have created under your guidance. Very powerful, very colorful, and they seem to really speak to who they are, and as that last one said, becoming who they hope to become. Herman, looking behind the colors and the images and the words on these striking murals, what do you see? And what should we see behind what's most obvious?
So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of the work of Hope Murals, and particularly as it pertains to the lives of young men and young ladies that we serve. But the murals are very much part of a program model that leverages the power of art to connect with young people in a creative way around issues that are oftentimes very difficult to talk about. Although all of the young people are in the detention center, many of them are victims themselves, and I think that we as a society need to take a different lens in looking at how we serve these young people who are in these positions and situations. But the artwork, in essence, is the creation of the young people. The murals, each mural that you saw, as well as the remaining 30 that are in the facility, are all created with the brainstorming power of a cohort that's identified for that given mural, along with the feature artist that works in tandem with the young people to sort of come up with an image that embodies their experiences, embodies their vision, embodies their ideas around their current situation, as well as how they envision their future. And the goal is to create images that are not only attractive and beautiful to the eye, but that resonate within the individuals, the young people, as well as the staff there. Art can serve in so many ways. We heard from some of the other panelists the need to heal. And I firmly believe that the young people who not only participate in the mural program, but those who are there in detention, who get to view these images every day, are on this journey of healing and self-discovery that most 15 and 16-year-olds go through all the time. And it should be no different for those who are incarcerated.
An audience member, Samuel McKinnon, asks, how do we change the trajectory of our youth being willing to pick up a gun to resolve hurt without consideration of their futures? And Herman, that's precisely your goal. Why do you think your work is achieving that goal? What evidence do you see?
Well, ultimately, there's a couple of ways to approach that. Sort of the as it impacts the individual participant. I think that there are opportunities to impact the young people in the engagement that we have over the course of the mural process, which is packaged over a 4-week period. And so the informal mentoring, the exchange, the engagement, the ability to get them to step out of their comfort zone and reflect and think about where they are and where they're trying to go are all part of the process. So one by one, each young person is challenged with that sort of process. But on a more grand macro scale, I think we need to look deeper into the issue of how we as a society glorify gun culture. I don't want to get into a political discussion about the right to own and the debate that's going on across the country, but the idea of guns or owning a gun or access to a gun for any young person in any community is easily achievable and accessible. One can obtain and secure a gun for whatever the reasons one is using it for, in a fashion that I think makes it extremely dangerous and only amplifies the challenges we have around gun violence. And then we look at sort of how violence is portrayed in the media, how it's portrayed in the entertainment industry, how it's portrayed in Hollywood, how it's portrayed in video games. The idea and value behind human life, as far as the richness of it and the ability to lose life so easily, I feel is an area that we as a society need to take another close look at, as how we portray guns and access to them. So there's this whole institutional and systemic approach that I think is a long-term process. But I do think that on the ground, those organizations and nonprofits and foundations that are investing in those communities from a prevention perspective as well as an intervention perspective need to continue to do their work. More funds need to be invested into that type of programming, because the evidence behind this is recidivism. Are we moving the needle in youth who are offenders? Upon their release, are they reoffending, and what are the charges? Many of the young people I work with are arrested on the charge of possession. A possession of a weapon. It doesn't mean that they robbed a bank or they assaulted anyone, but this culture and this ideology about owning a gun and having a gun that supports this bravado machismo-ness that I think we glorify in our society is also part of the problem. And getting to the root cause of that and having these dialogues and giving young men and young ladies the opportunity to explain why they feel that's necessary, but then having adults and mentors that can show them a different way and can get them to understand that that does not make you more of a man to own a weapon, and the idea of human life is too valuable to put yourself in a position that you have that power to take. And so it's a multi-level challenge that requires multi-level remedies.
You work directly with these young men and women. Can you give voice to what they themselves say? Brenton Jones asks, what are some of the things you are hearing from within the detention center regarding gun violence? What do they say? What do your charges say?
I think some of the feedback that I've received from several of the young men and unfortunately several of the young ladies that are incarcerated there at the detention center is that it's sort of just part of that youth culture in certain communities where as it goes along with having the finer things in life, having a gun is a matter of ownership and possession and almost a false sense of security and safety. I strongly believe that many of the young people that I've worked with did not necessarily have intention to use the gun in a harmful way, but owned one just in case, whether it was danger, whether it was self-defense. Obviously, there are some instances where there was an intentional cause behind the need for a gun. But for the most part, the feedback that I get from many of the young people, they regret it. It was a mistake. There may have been some peer pressure involved. They were at the wrong place at the wrong time. I had a case where a young lady was in the car where a gun was under the seat, and when they were pulled over, obviously she was arrested along with the other two young men because the gun had a history, and she had no idea that the gun was even in the car. And so there are many circumstances that our young people face that they end up behind bars. But I firmly believe from the testimonies that I have experienced with them, their number one, I guess, outcry is, please don't define me by my mistakes. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have to spend the rest of my life behind bars learning from that.
Understood. Sarai Cruz asks, and this can be, anyone can answer this. Many see gun violence just as a crime issue in Miami. How do you see it? And what are the different ways beyond our criminal justice system that you would address it? Clearly, Herman already is. In your opinion, how can residents engage and make change in order to reduce gun violence in our community? And I'd like anyone to answer that question. Serena?
Ladies.
Okay. I think instead of seeing it as a crime problem, we should see it as a humanity problem, a community problem, a world problem, us. I believe that we speculate when someone is killed from gun violence, or when things of that nature happen. I just believe that we need to start having more and more conversations. We need to have conversations. We need to get out there. We need to speak up when we see things that are happening in the community. Because unfortunately, when young men and women are shot or killed in a community, no one speaks up. We have this thing in our community about like not snitching. Oh, you shouldn't snitch. And I guess it stems back from when you're younger and you're getting ready to tell on, your brothers, your siblings or family members. And it's like, well, you're not supposed to snitch. And I think that we have this image in inner cities that if you speak out and you tell what happened, then it's going to follow you the rest of your life. You're going to be considered a snitch. So a lot of times people don't speak up, and then they also don't speak up because there's no protection to the witness. And I think we have to do a lot more in protecting witnesses when they do come forward and say, hey, this is what happened. Like I also do spoken word. I also speak at different events. I was actually at Shire's last event at the Bakehouse. I was the feature poet. So I do whatever I can to share Isaiah's story, not just Isaiah's story, but the effects of gun violence within our communities. And I just believe that we as a community, if we stop seeing it as a crime, from a crime aspect, and start seeing it from a humanity aspect, then we can move forward. We can have conversations that produce solutions. And that's the thing. We can talk and talk and talk all day. But these kids, they're lost. They feel hopeless. They feel like they can't achieve their dreams. A lot of things in our community are non-existent. We used to have so many magnet programs and after-school programs and mentorship programs that poured into these young individuals. And that seems to be like extinct. You know, it's fading away. Those things aren't in the communities like they used to be. And I believe that we as a community have to offer more of ourselves to these kids, because they really seem hopeless and in despair. And we know, I'm sure we all have a story, but I know what it is to be broken, you know, beyond comprehension, and where I probably felt like there was no hope. And everybody doesn't have the tenacity to see the bigger picture or to keep pushing. And I just feel like this is so much bigger than a crime aspect. This is a community issue, because when these kids, especially these young kids and adults, are gunned down, you leave behind their families to mourn. Isaiah is gone, but I'm still mourning. I'm still grieving. I'm still hurting. My family, my friends. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah, his life was snatched in a blink of an eye, but this is a lifelong journey for me now.
You know, you talked about no snitching. How do you balance the very real need for information with the very real fear? I mean, that goes beyond a culture of not telling on your little brother or anything, but the very real fear of maybe losing your life, of becoming a target. If you do talk to the police, if you do talk to the state attorney, how do you balance that? How should?
Well, I do know Tangela Sears and the parents of murdered children, they did go to Tallahassee to get, you know, a law put in place to protect the identities of people that speak up. And that's a start. You know, we can easily say, well, go say something. But if nothing is put in place, if there's no laws put in place to protect these individuals, they're not going to feel comfortable speaking up and telling what they know. And yes, it does go beyond, you know, the snitching, but in a community to snitch. And we need to learn that there's a difference with helping someone close a case, and there's a difference with just telling whatever. You understand? Like it's a huge difference. I just know with that law being set in place to protect the identities of witnesses, that is a start. But we have to have something set in stone where their names will be blotted out, where their addresses will be blotted out, because unfortunately in a court of law, we have a right to know who's coming up against us, who's speaking ill will against us, or saying that they seen, or who witnessed whatever. So the first thing is to continue trying to have laws put into place to help protect those witnesses.
Thank you. Megan, how can this be seen as an issue that goes beyond just crime?
So for me, I agree with Serena on so many standpoints, but I think I don't look at it as simply just a crime issue. I definitely look at it as a resources issue. I think I know most crime victims don't get what they need to heal from crime and violence. And I think that when we talk about just, it's a crime issue, it's a crime issue, I think that we really miss out on an opportunity to really get to what a root cause could be of what our issue is. I think that it's about intention and investments. I think that oftentimes we also think that you have to be from a community to help heal a community. that has been impacted by violence. And I think that to a certain degree, like there are some people who often say they want to help, but they don't know how. I think that we should just broaden up the ways, the dialogue of the ways in which we can do something about what is going on. I think right now there's a serious need in Miami specifically for trauma recovery services. And TRCs, or trauma recovery centers, is something that Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice has worked on and has talked about bringing to the city. And the reasons why is because we need wraparound services. I think that after you've been affected by crime, you have a lot of issues of not knowing where to go to get resources or get in contact with resources. Most times you're not hearing back from your victim's advocate or your detectives on your cases, so you're not necessarily sure of how to go about that. Filling out forms like victims compensation and knowing about how to do these things. If you don't know how are you going to even apply for the resources that you need to heal from the crime or the trauma that has been done? And I think that when we think about how we are working towards prevention, I think we should really make sure that we are intentional and mindful of the fact that when we only speak about preventative measures, we kind of miss out on an opportunity to serve those who have been already impacted by crime, just like myself. When you talk about just what can we do to prevent the next shooting, there are so many of us, Serena, myself, like honestly, Herman, just from being working with some of the youth, we are all survivors in this space who we need the resources and we need to be seen as survivors, not just victims who at the end of the day, it's just about a burial. And even when it comes to that, the survivors, the resources that families need to bury their loved ones too, these are things that you can go to a place like a trauma recovery center and find out information on. So I think when we talk about just investments in preventative measures and things that are going to be direct wraparound services to all who have been impacted, I think that's a new way to kind of shape how we talk about this, rather than just saying this is the problem without actually thinking about how can we go about getting different solutions for this problem.
Right. You've talked in some broad strokes about the needs, a lot of it which would be supplied, say, by government, maybe by nonprofits. I guess Sarai Cruz also asks, you know, can any of you get to what residents who really do want to engage and really do make a difference here, what can they do? What can they do in terms of volunteering, in terms of how they proceed politically and for whom they vote? You mentioned Tangela Sears, Serena, going to Tallahassee. What one thing can someone do to really get on the road to making a difference?
If I may add,
Please,
I think
Herman.
that there's this constant phrase that's used that we all are familiar with, that it takes a village to raise a child. But I do think that there is a level of accountability in the same way we want to hold our police departments accountable and we want to hold our government elected officials accountable. As a community, we have to hold each other accountable. This gun violence is a poison in our community, and we have to rid the community of the poison. And that means having some courage. That means unifying. I grew up at a time when every elder on the block could hold me accountable for misbehaving as a youth, and then would tell my mom and my dad about my misbehavior, and then there would be consequences for that. We have to shift from being enablers, where we tolerate crime and we tolerate those that are guilty of crimes on all levels. And I think that's also a ground level, sort of grassroots, community-based approach that grows as the numbers grow, as more folks in the community come out and react and are upset about the realities and take ownership of sort of supporting each other and having each other's back. If you look at the outrage that pours out when there's a shooting that involves a police officer versus maybe a shooting that involves just John Doe from the community. They receive different levels of attention. They receive different levels of sort of outbursts from, and accountability is immediately asked for. But I think it has to permeate at all levels, and I think that it's tough because. The rule of thumb in the community is, protect yourself, watch your back, and there's already a unfortunate tension and lack of trust between local community residents and the local police department. And this is the same police department that's supposed to protect you if you are outspoken and if you stand up for the community. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done and it can't be band-aid work. There has to be some intentional work done to target bringing community folks together, and working together with your schools, with your nonprofits, with your elected officials. There has to be a presentation across all platforms that enough is enough, and that the toleration of this type of actions and behavior are going to be dealt with, because you cannot hide.
Matthew Beatty asks, what do foundations and nonprofit organizations, which you've just mentioned, Herman, what do they need to better understand about gun violence in Black communities so that they can be more effective and intentional in solving the root causes of the issue?
I believe.
Continue. Go ahead.
Yes, I believe strongly that we need to educate young people and their families. There's a lot of community organizations that are doing this work. Unfortunately, there's always a greater need than there are resources. Why do we have to wait until someone's a victim or someone is incarcerated to then have these discussions about gun violence and the culture of gun violence? This should be part of your extracurricular activity programming that's happening in schools and after school programs, because if you're waiting until the child is a victim, it's too late. And the numbers speak for themselves. There's a really great report put out by the Children's Defense Fund entitled The State of America, and they've got different tabs that focus on different subjects impacting young people, from poverty to health. And there's a particular report that they provide on youth and gun violence, and the numbers are astonishing. And when you look at the numbers across the country, this is a national problem, and in every city you have the data that demonstrates it's no different there than in any other community. But too many times we react instead of being proactive and looking at how we address these very tough issues before more young people become victims.
Got it. Serena, Megan, the question was, what do foundations and nonprofit organizations need to better understand about gun violence so that they can better make an investment in its solutions?
Well, the nonprofit organizations that I'm aware of, they put a lot into the communities. I think we get clouded because we don't see things on the media. We don't see people working in the media that we feel like it's not being done. But there's a lot of mentorship programs. There are a lot of nonprofit programs. There are a lot of community advocates that are really working hard to help combat gun violence and to help educate those in the community and to help provide solutions and programs for our community. But I think we get lost because it's not being put out there, that we think that it doesn't exist, but it does. You have regular folks, regular people that give back to the community from out of their pockets. You understand, with no help from the political standpoint or from any other people in the community, but it's still getting done. I just think that we tend to say, because I know, like, even with, well, what about Black on Black crime? And it's like, it's always an outrage. Well, what are you all doing about Black on Black crime? Which we know Black on Black crime is a myth. People tend to kill within their demographics. So I just want to debunk that. But the thing is, there are really activists and advocates and a lot of community resources that is out here to try to help combat gun violence. And just because it's not being put on the front line, we feel that it doesn't exist. And I feel like a lot of them, they do a great job with touching bases within the community and being relatable and just being human and just trying to help victims and also to prevent gun violence.
Right. Got it. Megan?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think that when it comes to the ways that organizations respond to survivors of or victims of gun violence and they address it within their work, I think they could be very intentional at knowing that when you are working closely with the families, you are getting what you get, and that is because daily what it looks like to survive gun violence changes. So don't be so quick to write off a survivor as someone who is hard to work with or hard to help or doesn't want the help, just because it's not easy for them to open up and receive the help, especially when you're so used to people just wanting you to be a part of their organization as a way of how it might make the organization look. I think that it's definitely important for us to be mindful of the fact that this for people like myself and for people like Serena, when we go in spaces and we're joining organizations and we're speaking up, it really takes us back to a moment, and we're being very, very vulnerable in these spaces. And a lot of times people think it's enough to say that we're giving you an opportunity to do just that. But actually, and then you don't hear back from them. Sometimes just formulating a genuine relationship out of care for someone in their time of healing or grief, I think is important. And yes, this is the work. Like, yes, we have work to do, but I don't think that we should ever get lost in working to end or fight, for this to end within the work without actually paying attention to the fact of how we're interacting with those who've already experienced it. I also think that when it comes to just the community level, what we can do, education is everything. I think that there's a lot of times where things are going on and people are not supporting them because, let's be honest, gun violence, I don't think it's not a sexy topic. It's not a cool thing to do. I don't look at it like that. And so I also know that though the culture might make it look like it looks one way, or it seems safe to have it or to carry it in one way, I feel like we're not talking enough in these spaces about the real fears that people have. And maybe if we talk about root causes and we address the fears and not just attacking or pinpointing how people, I think a lot of parents get blamed as if they don't necessarily do all that they could have done to help their kids. And I think that these things, when you're working within an organization, you want them to not be judging you based off of what they might have heard about your situation. You want them to allow you to come to a space and say, this is who I am, this is what I've experienced, and this is the help that I need. And also on the community level, just when it comes to education, if you know of a resource, or even for organizations, if you know of funding or resources that are out there, let the community know. I think that we don't get access to a lot of resources because we don't know about them, especially financial resources. I think right now there is American Rescue Plan dollars that we know that I think the Miami is getting about 500 million of the federal stimulus funds dollars. And yes, that is for the pandemic relief, but I think that should also be a response to the uptick in violence throughout this time. And so I've made it my business to not just go into spaces and to always advocate on behalf of survivors like myself, but to educate those who have experienced this like me about things that are out there. We can use these kinds of funding, like public health dollars, to really make sure that we're being intentional with the investments that we have as it relates to recovering from this trauma. And so there's many ways that I think that we can. Let's not get so hooked up in the issue itself, which is gun violence. We know we have a problem, and let's just always make sure that we're on the side where we're working on a solution. And I feel like you can't go wrong by trying to be a part of the solution.
Understood. All of you are working in realms channeling some of the pain, some of the trauma, and like paying it forward. Serena, you never got to go shopping with your son for his tuxedo for the prom.
No, I didn't.
But you are doing it for other young men in the community. Can you talk about what you're doing and what you're getting out of it?
Well, the year that he was supposed to graduate, I extended myself and my husband, we sent two young men to prom. One was from Central and the other one was from New Orleans Senior High. And it made me feel good. Like, it made me feel really, really, really good to give back. I try to attach myself to young men. I just it was a great experience. And like I said, I have gone to community centers, youth juvenile centers to speak, to share Isaiah's story, just to let those young men know, like, you do have people out here that cares about you. Like, life is not over. It hasn't even started. And I think that we hold on to, like, the mistakes that they make. And it made me feel really good to give back in Isaiah's, to honor his name. I do whatever I can to honor his name.
And what is it that you specifically do? You have helped them get good, neat prom duds. What do you do for them?
If
you go
they
shopping with them?
I went shopping with those two when I did it. I took them shopping. They were able to pick out whatever they wanted. I got them, cologne, and I keep in contact with the both of them. We still keep in contact, Christian and Jason, to just check on them, to make sure that they're okay. And if they need anything, that I'm there. One of them, I won't say who, but one night he got into something and I was the first person that he called, woke me up out of my sleep in the middle of the night. And he needed me, he needed my husband, and I was there. I just want them to know that I'm accessible. Isaiah's death has taken a toll on me, but however I can give back, whenever, however I'm willing.
Thank you. Megan, you have started your own organization to help people with the healing process who have gone through similar traumas. What's the name of the organization, and how does that work?
So I started Mending Hearts with Megan a few years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago. I did get shot 9 years ago. So it was just an organic community that I kind of created within the space of moving from, one, I guess you could say, one organization or one event to a next. I wanted to create a way for the survivors to have one connectivity, one place where they can connect and share about all things that are going on, no matter the ways in which they've been impacted by gun violence. And so I usually hold space for us in person to have healing vigils, or in the past year, we've done a lot of things on Clubhouse. So on Clubhouse, I have a twice a month conversation in the Clubhouse room for gun violence survivors, where if you've been impacted by gun violence in any way, shape, or form, you can come into the room and share your experience, because I know storytelling is important when it comes to recovery. I also work with survivors very closely to develop wellness plans for themselves and holistic healing plans for themselves as they navigate through the aftermath of trauma. And I also work alongside a lot of other advocates and community organizers who are working on gun violence issues. I make sure that I partner with them in any which way I can. I was with Shire Reagan's working on the Say Their Names mural daily, and that was just my commitment to the families and to the work. But that's something that I was also able to bring back and share with many of the survivors in the space who want to know what was still going on. So these conversations happen daily about gun violence in my space, and the ways that we do it is always different. It's whatever we need, but that's what the Mending Hearts with Megan is about. It's about healing survivors in their hearts in whatever way they need to right now, where they're at in their journey.
Thank you. Herman, what led you to do what you do with Hope Murals?
Well, as somebody who has a professional background in education, being a former high school teacher from New York City, the arts and creativity was always something that I implemented into my daily lessons. I grew up as a teenager in the 80s during the birth of hip hop. And so whether it was dancing or rhyming or emceeing or music production, it was always something that captured the attention of youth in my classroom, no matter what age level. And so at this point in my life and in my career, I wanted to stay in the creative world. I do think that the arts and both Megan and Serena are part of that as part of the spoken word community. The arts is a very powerful platform to bring up subject matter that is sometimes extremely difficult to just have a conversation about. But when creatives get involved and sort of incorporate that magic spell of art into the subject matter, I think some of the guard goes down that many people experience when trying to have a conversation. I think that there's a natural healing that takes place because certain points and certain images and certain words or verses resonate with people differently. You never know in your audience or who's viewing what they've been through, what their story is. And art allows for sort of the subject matter to be approached and to delve into in a way that I think becomes therapeutic. We've heard both of our other panelists as well as others talk about the healing that's so necessary once you've experienced this. But we have tons of research that shows that young people growing up with some of the challenges that they face with poverty and high rates of crime and unemployment and violence are all the same symptoms that U.S. military soldiers go through and when they're deployed and experience PTSD upon returning from deployment. So if we know this, why aren't we investing in these kinds of community programs and our school programming that addresses the mental health needs that I believe all of us suffer from, because you're exposed to this constant sort of environment that bombards you with all of these isms, and you're expected to navigate and figure out how to not only survive but to succeed in life. And so I applaud both Megan and Serena not only for their bravery and their courage, but as they heal, they're helping others and they're giving others opportunities that maybe they haven't discovered for themselves on how to move forward with their lives after such tragic experiences.
We have just a few minutes, about 3 minutes left, and I would like to ask each of you to just briefly tell our audience the one thing that they really should take away from your experiences. What is it that they do not know and that they should? Herman?
Well, I'd like to respond to that on behalf of the young people that I work with and that I serve in the detention centers. And one of the fundamental messages we try to encourage them is to not lose hope. Hope we use as an acronym, which stands for Hold On, Pain Ends. But you have to be an active participant in your healing, and you have to be willing to not lose sight of a better tomorrow. And that's not easy. It's easier said than done, but maintaining hope and maintaining a sense of you are not defined by your mistakes or your past, and you can change things for the better.
Thank you. Megan?
For me, I think that it is just important. I would hope that if there's anything that people take away from today's conversation, it's that there's many ways in which you can do or get involved with gun violence, or support those who have been impacted by gun violence, and just get local and find out the ways in which you can. And outside of that though we might look like we have it all together, survivors of gun violence are showing up each day and giving it their best that they have. And so extending grace and compassion, if you do know someone who's been impacted by gun violence, is something hopefully I think you took from this. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Serena?
I would just like for people to take from this, besides, what Megan said as far as compassion, is that grieving doesn't have a set blueprint, and that we should be a lot more compassionate, even if we don't understand. That just being grateful that someone is taking the time to put their feet on the floor every single day to get through whatever they're going through is a process. And I think that we should all learn how to respect someone else's grieving process, even though it doesn't look like ours.
Thank you. Before we come to the end of this edition of Speaking of Miami, I want to encourage our viewers to send their comments on this discussion and to tell us their ideas for future subjects. Send that to Herald Ed, it's like heralded, at miamiherald.com. And please put "Speaking of Miami" in the subject line. And if you like what we are doing, we also would like to encourage you to subscribe to the Miami Herald. We are doing urgent and compelling journalism, and we hope you really want to be a part of it in terms of being informed. I would like to really thank our three guests today for plowing through some difficult emotional territory for them and for sharing their passion and their commitment to healing and to making this community a better place. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Nancy Ankrum, Herald Editorial Board editor. Thank you.